My wife cheated on me once. Once was enough. I'm sure she thought she had everything under control and was very surprised at how I handled it. The course of events was the usual story. We had been married for 15 years. Things had become quite boring. We grew apart, spending time in the same house, under the same roof but in different rooms. She moved away from me. At some point I noticed that we were no longer partners, no longer confidants, no longer lovers. She left too many clues. I did some scouting and did some digging. It turns out she was having an affair, at least an emotional one. She started complaining to me. This was normal, and I stopped listening to her complaining and bullying me over the years. Now, with this new evidence, I not only heard her, I listened. She was unhappy with our marriage. She stopped loving me. This was clear to me. If I tried to bring up the idea that she was wrong, that we could fix our love, that I loved her and we could repair our marriage, she would just pull away from me even more. She just looked at me, and in her eyes I saw another bridge between us crumbling. To hell with all this, I said to myself, finishing my beer. I replayed our last argument over and over in my head. I tried to find a way to get her back. After all, she was mine. It seemed to me, I thought to myself, that every time I tried harder to get my wife back, she moved even further away from me. I sat late into the night, letting my wife sleep in our large family bed while I nursed my hurt feelings. Somewhere along the way, my brain switched on, and a new way of thinking burst into me. Why did I argue with her about how she felt? Really, why? At that moment, I realized that everything my wife told me was true, a truth that I couldn't just ignore or talk her out of. She was telling me how she felt, and here I was, arguing with her, telling her that she was wrong, that she didn't really feel those feelings. How stupid was that? How can you tell someone that they are wrong about their feelings? Well, it would stop immediately. What she felt was what she felt, so why argue about it? So what did I feel? Strange. No, actually, it was strange because as I sat on the couch in the dark, thinking about my recent relationship with my wife, I realized that I, too, was unhappy. I wasn't sure I loved her anymore. I was in love with the idea of still being together and being married to my loving wife. But that wasn't a reality, was it? This eureka moment hit me. It took me a while to put everything together, but now I had a plan of action. Whether it worked or not, at that moment I didn't care because I now knew that what I was doing and what she was doing wasn't working. What does it mean? The definition of insanity is trying to do the same thing that didn't work, thinking over and over again that it will work. I smiled through my beer bottles in the trash and decided to sleep in the guest bedroom. It's all part of the plan. Frank? Linda opened the door to the guest bedroom and flicked the light switch to keep me awake. Why are you sleeping in the guest room? I squinted against the light until my eyes adjusted to the bright light. I stayed up late. I didn't want to bother you, I said. She looked at me and then wandered into the kitchen to get some coffee. I am not a coffee drinker, as I have been blessed with the ability to wake up and be alert immediately. I jumped into the shower and prepared for a confrontation. Today I had spring in my step. Linda sat opposite me in the living room. I sat in my usual position on the sofa. Linda clenched her fists. She was worried, and I felt that she was getting ready to tell me something. Frank, she began, this does not work. I feel disappointed and confused, and I don't think I love you anymore. I sat and looked at her. She paused, then continued. Frank, I know we've been together for a long time, but I think we need to get a divorce. The word hung in the air. I smiled as she looked at me nervously. That sounds good, honey, I said. She blinked. Frank, did you hear me? I nodded. Yes, of course I heard you. You don't feel like everything is working. You don't love me. You want a divorce. I agree. Do you understand? Now she was alarmed. I stood up and walked over to her. I knelt down in front of her. Linda, I can't change how you feel. You do not love me. How can I object to this? Can I tell you that you're wrong? No. You do not love me. Well, to be honest, there were many times in our lives when I didn't love you either. If you feel like you can't live with me anymore, well, again, how can I argue with that? Linda looked at me like I was crazy. However, deep down, I saw that she was nodding at my keen ability to understand that What she said was true, and she appreciated it. "Wait, you said you didn't love me?" she asked. "There were times just like yours." She got a little worried. In all the times she played out this little scene in her head, she never expected me to react the way I did. I loved seeing her emotions reflected on her face. "Well," I said. "Anything else?" "I have to leave tonight, so I'd like to sort this out now if you don't mind." "Are you leaving right now?" I stood up and started putting on my jacket, getting ready to leave. No. "Frank, where are you going?" "I'm leaving. I think I'll go to a few bars. I think I might start looking for someone else instead of you right now." I waved goodbye to her and left her sitting in her chair with her mouth open. I stopped at the right bar. There, I grabbed a bourbon and sat at one of the tables away from the crowd. I took out my cell phone and put another part of my plan into action. I called my friend from work. Jessica worked with me in my department and was known as the company gossip. Playing the role of the poor, abandoned husband, I solemnly conveyed to her the conversation I had had with my wife, in particular, how she had stunned me with a request for a divorce. The reason I called her, not the real reason, was because I was at the bar drowning my sorrows in whiskey and might not show up for work the next day. I could hear the wheels turning in her head because Jessica and I would occasionally flirt at work, and she was lonely. The next thing I knew, Jessica had asked herself out to me for the evening, under the guise of looking out for me and being the friend I needed while I was in such an emotionally fragile situation. I met Jessica at a bar that I knew my wife and her friends frequented. Was I worried that someone might see me? No. My marriage appears to be over. My wife didn't love me, and frankly, right now, I didn't love my wife Linda either. Jessica looked good. She arrived quickly, dressed nice and sexy. Maybe she wanted to get to me before anyone had a chance, at least that's what I wanted to believe, but when she saw me, she was a little surprised that my body language and mood did not match the news I told her over the phone. The smile on my face didn't help either. "Frank, what's going on?" She sat down next to me with a gloomy expression on her face. I raised my hand and pointed to my ring finger, which was now exposed. She wants a divorce. That's how she feels. Why should I fight this? I called the waiter and ordered another one. Jessica ordered her usual Cosmo. "Frank, on the phone you seemed more broken." "Jess, we haven't been happy for a while now. I finally realized that maybe I don't love her the way I used to. She wants this divorce from me, so you know what? I'm not going to fight it. Does she want to leave? Fine. I'm not going to lie alone, forgotten, and unloved." Jessica took a long sip of her cocktail. She sat and looked at me. Now I realized that I was influencing this woman. Whatever my feelings about it, I noticed that it confused her. "Maybe we can dance?" I didn't wait for her answer. I just grabbed her hand and led her to the dance floor. "Frank, what are you going to do?" I hugged her tighter to me. "I'm going to give her everything she thinks she wants. I'm going to do whatever I want. Right now, I want to dance with you. In fact, I've been wanting to dance with you for a long time. Now I can do it." She looked into my eyes and smiled. "If you're trying to take revenge on her?" I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe." She pressed her whole body against me. She felt good and warm. "That suits me," she sighed. We lost track of time. It was so nice not having to worry about calling home to let Linda know when I'd be back. Jessica was funny, smart, and we flirted all evening. She was 100% mine. She knew it. I knew it. But I didn't take her with me, although it was really nice to know that someone wanted me. My wife hurt my ego, and Jessica supported it. Moreover, I would say that Jessica was a more attractive woman than Linda. We kissed in the parking lot of her car. I opened the door for her and smiled. "See you at work tomorrow." She nodded. I made it clear that I needed to have some fun right now, and I had no intention of pinning another woman down. In my not-so-subtle sense, which Jessica understood, I was now looking for someone for myself. I'm sure that by the end of work tomorrow, all the women in the company will know about it. I'd like to tell you that I'm a laid-back man, but the truth was that I was looking forward to rubbing some of Linda's nose with it. "Where have you been?" Linda attacked me when I entered the house. She was in bed, but as soon as she heard me come in, She came out to see me. I put my coat in the closet and began to undress before going to bed. "I was walking," I said. "I told you I'm leaving. Why should you care?" Frank, I was a little worried that you might have done something bad to yourself." I smiled at her. "Linda, I know how you feel. It suits me. You want a divorce? I will gladly give you a divorce. Far be it from me to force you to live a life with someone you no longer love." I grabbed my pillow and clothes the next morning and headed to the guest room. "Frank?" Linda called out to me hesitantly. I stopped, transferring my things to my other hand. "What?" She lowered her eyes. She couldn't look me in the face. "I don't understand this. I mean, you don't have to sleep in a different bed. Are you suggesting that you sleep on another bed? Will you move out of our bedroom?" I didn't want to make it easy for her. She gasped and wiped away a tear. I didn't mean that. I mean, you can share my bed. That is, if you want to. If you don't want that, well, I guess I could move to another room." She was excited. The thought of actually moving out of her bedroom was something she never expected. She held her breath in fear that I would force her to do just that. I put her out of her misery. "Well, this bed is more comfortable. I'll stay here with you if it doesn't cause you too much trouble." Her face brightened. "Oh yes, that will be wonderful. I mean, it's not a problem for me." "Okay then," I said, and threw the pillow back on the bed. She wanted to talk, but I was too tired and told her to go to bed. "We'll have time to talk later." And sure enough, by the next evening, 3 more women at work had proposed to me. I even had a friend give me his sister's number. She was a widow and had difficulty finding someone to date. I set up dates for the coming week with all 4 girls and repeated with Jessica. I deliberately left tonight free because I had to talk to Linda. We needed to figure everything out. I guess she needed to live her life. I returned to the house and ran into Linda. "Carol saw you last night at the bar. She said you were with a woman. Who the hell was she? What did you do together?" "Carol said you two were very comfortable with each other. I might explode at her. I could have yelled at her, called her a slut for walking around, talking to men, neglecting me, moving away from me. But I didn't." I smiled and told her that I would answer her questions after I changed. She tried to challenge me, but I ignored her and went to change into my lounge clothes. As I got more comfortable, I noticed that Linda was looking at me intently. She was ready for a fight. Her eyes were close to tears, but her body was tense with rage. "It was Jessica from the job I work with," I told her. I didn't deny it. I'm sure she thought I would start to wriggle out, but I didn't. "What did you do together?" she asked accusingly. I looked at her and simply said, "We were on a date." "On a date?" she squealed. I nodded and still sat calmly in my seat. "You have no right. We are married. What makes you think you can do this?" I stood up, grabbed a drink from the kitchen, and sat down again. She was still standing, staring at me, waiting for my answer. "Why should you care?" I asked. She stared at me, her mouth open. "We are married. You want to get a divorce, don't you?" She nodded, unsure of her voice. "You said you don't love me, right?" "I said I'm not in love with you," she corrected me. "And I agree with you, Linda. You're not in love with me anymore, so why don't I go and look for love from someone else? You want a divorce? You don't love me, what does that give me? What incentive do I have to stay here with you?" She sat down, actually sank into her chair. "What will people say? Don't you understand what this looks like? Right now, Carol is talking all over town about my husband dating some slut." "Don't you dare call Jessica a slut," I growled. She was a perfect lady and I was a gentleman last night. She deliberately went on a date with a married man. I call it a slut. "So," I said angrily, standing up and pacing the room in front of her. "She's single, and if she's a slut, what would you call a married woman who knowingly dates other men without her husband's knowledge?" Linda stared at me. She couldn't say anything. I saw how her thoughts worked. "How much does he know?" she thought in panic. "What does this have to do with me?" She exploded. I just looked at her. Time dragged on endlessly. I was silent. She saw it in my face. I knew. Her body began to shake. How? How much do you know? Enough, I shouted. Whether you had sex with them, I really don't care. You see, my dear, this marriage ended when you decided to take me out of the game. I'm not going to cry about it. I'm moving on. I'm going to take care of myself, considering I don't get support from my wife at home. I got up and went to the kitchen. Dinner was not ready. I decided to do something for myself. She could cook for herself. A little later, she came into the kitchen and watched me finish my dinner. I'm very sorry, she told me. I put the dishes away and turned to her. I think you should know that I have plans for the rest of the week, so don't expect me home early. If you prefer, I can sleep in the guest room. She didn't answer me. I went upstairs to go to bed. I decided to sleep in the guest room. I'm sure Linda didn't sleep well. I met Christina after work. She was a cute blonde, about 35, divorced, with 2 children. We chatted over coffee and then did something really stupid. I took her to play laser tag, is a team military tactical game using safe laser weapons and sensors that record hits. Sensors are placed on vests, helmets, or headbands. Yes, it was us. 2 adults against 10 teenagers who all turned on us and continued to destroy us at the beginning of each game. Christina loved it. I loved sitting and talking to her after we were killed, waiting for the next game to start. At some point during the last game, we both got killed. We both fell side by side and played dead. I pulled her towards me as we lay there and kissed her. She kissed me back. We then had a nice dinner, and soon I walked her back to her house, where we kissed goodbye. She said goodbye to me before we moved on to anything other than kissing, and made me promise to ask her out again, soon. I expected another confrontation with Linda when I returned, but strangely enough, she was subdued. "Hello?" she said. I smiled and greeted her as I undressed after the date. "Looks like you had a good time?" she told me. Her emotions were hidden. "That's right. Thanks for noticing. How was your evening?" We talked. For the first time in months, we sat down and talked late into the night. I listened to her, and she listened to me. "I've never had sex with anyone else, Frank." "I swear to you," she admitted. "I've kissed several men and shared my thoughts and feelings with Justin at work. He wanted more from me, but I wasn't ready. Linda, I'm sure we're both guilty of this, but even though you didn't actually have sex with anyone else, you still deceived me. We were a team. I'm glad you stopped yourself from cheating on me before asking me for a divorce. I really respect you for that. I should have listened to your feelings, but instead I started arguing with them." "Yes," she agreed. We sat in silence for some time. "Frank, I'm confused right now. I don't know if I want a divorce." I smiled. "You'll let me know when you find out everything. I'm not kicking you out of the house, and I don't plan to leave it anytime soon." "Frank." I had already gotten up and was about to go to bed. "Are you still going to date Jessica?" "Yes. I'm dating her now. And with others too. Do what you want to do. Figure it out. I have to do what's best for me. If we get divorced, well, then it wasn't meant to be." I headed to the guest bedroom. She followed me in and stood in the doorway. "Frank?" I turned to see her as I took off my shirt. "Come back to bed with me, please." I hesitated. "Do you think this is reasonable?" Tears flowed from her eyes. "I don't know. I just want you right now." I held out my hands to her, and she threw herself into them and began to sob. She was confused. She didn't know what to feel. I carried her back to our bed. I held her as we fell asleep. Lauren was a good friend of mine. She was a fan, and she and I would always talk about the latest TV shows and fan stuff. We were at a neat bar with live music that she was dying to go to, but none of her friends or dates were interested. That evening, I took her with me. It was fun, and although we had flirted at work from time to time before, there was absolutely no chemistry between us as romantic partners. We had fun, but we were only friends. It was enough for both of us, and I returned home early. I pulled up to the house and found a car parked in the driveway. My jealousy reared its ugly head for a moment, but I calmed down and repeated to myself that everything would be as it would be. It doesn't make sense, does it? I learned this from my psychiatrist when I was being treated for my fear of flying. Instead of freaking out and screaming to myself, "Oh my God, I'm going to get on a plane," he made me change my tone to one of excitement and anticipation. "Oh my God, I'm about to get on a plane. I cannot wait." This took some practice, but generally worked in the short term. Not knowing what to expect, I repeated my mantra and opened the door to find Linda sitting and chatting with Carol, one of her friends. "Frank, I didn't expect you to come back so early." "Linda." "Carol." I nodded to them. Carol shot daggers from her eyes at me. She didn't say anything. "Business ended early, so I came back." "Want a little privacy?" Linda and Carol exchanged glances, and then Carol stood up from the couch. "I have to go. Linda, I'll talk to you soon." Linda walked Carol to the door. Carol gave me a nasty look, didn't say anything to me, and walked away. "Sorry for barging in. I didn't want to interrupt your evening," I told her. "Don't be stupid, Frank. This is your home, too. House. When was the last time she or I called this house our home?" "Have you eaten?" she asked me. She had some leftover food, which she and Carol apparently shared. I picked at the food while she cleaned the kitchen. "How are you?" I asked. She sat down. "I'm fine, I think." I invited Carol to talk, but she confused me even more. "How?" "She wanted me to throw you out, change the locks, and divorce your ass." Well, my key still works, so I take it you didn't have time to call a locksmith." She laughed. "Do not be silly. I had to explain to her that I was the one who asked for a divorce. After I told you this, what rights do I have over you? I left you, didn't I?" She looked into my eyes intently. That last part was a question she desperately wanted to know the answer to. I wanted to jump up and allay her fears, tell her that I still belonged to her. But I didn't. I said nothing. In the past, my intentions would have turned her off. Maybe this new waiver plan will have a different effect on her. Changing the subject, I blasted the audience. "Bad news, I'm afraid. My date for tomorrow evening is canceled. Now I'm stuck with concert tickets. Maybe you want to go with me instead of another girl?" His face brightened. "Oh, Frank. I wish I could. I mean, if that's what you want." I shrugged. "Well, I can give these tickets to someone at work." "No," she said decisively. "I mean, I'd be happy to go." "Happy to come with me?" She blushed and nodded. "Sure?" I asked. "Yes," she whispered. I smiled. This could be funny. I broke the news to Heather. She was disappointed, but that's life in the game called dating. Linda was dressed and ready to go when I picked her up after work. She looked good. She was dressed to impress. I'm pretty sure she was dressed to impress me. I didn't know too much about this group. Heather suggested I go to this concert, so I bought tickets. They were good. Loud, but good. I guess I wasn't surprised when we ran into Heather. I saw that Linda was surprised at how good Heather looked and quickly realized that Heather would be my date for the evening. I apologized to Heather, and she looked at Linda. "Heather, this is Linda." "Linda, Heather was supposed to be my date today, but..." Something happened. Usually when I introduced Linda, I always called her my wife. This time I decided not to do it, and Linda noticed right away. "Heather! It's so nice to meet you. I'm Mrs. Donaldson." She looked straight into Heather's eyes, and something happened between the two women. Heather was smart enough to apologize and said she would see me at work the next day. Linda was seething with anger. She grabbed my hand. "Frank, where's your wedding ring?" I shrugged. "At home. I took it off after you asked for a divorce. Now I don't need it anymore." Linda was speechless again. Damn. I had fun keeping her quiet. "Frank, we are not divorced yet." I smiled and focused on the music. Several times I went into the bar to refill our glasses. Each time Linda watched me like a hawk. Every time I was in a bar, some woman would come up to me and I would chat with her for a bit. I made one laugh and she even gave me her number. Linda saw all this, but said nothing. I'm not really a ladies' man. I can flirt a little, but I've always been respectful and never pushed anything. After Linda asked me for a divorce, I allowed myself to be free. I discovered that I had a pretty crude skill at flirting, and now that my inhibitions were gone, I found that I didn't have to hold back. I wasn't the best-looking guy around, but I always had the ability to be witty, and I found that women seemed to appreciate my humor and frankness. Linda saw me in action for the first time in a long time. I think it surprised her, but she must have realized that long ago the same moves, and flirtations had captured her heart. Tonight, I think that's what she was remembering. She was silent the whole way home. I was silent too. Once in the house, we began to get ready for bed. "Frank, where is your wedding ring?" I pointed to the sock drawer in the dresser. She walked over and opened it. Reaching out, she grabbed the gold ring and pulled it out. She looked at him, then at me. The weight of the symbol hit her, and her eyes filled with tears. "Now it's yours," I told her. "I think you should throw it away or sell it." She looked at me. "What should I do with him?" she asked, stammeringly. "I think whatever you want. The ring is a symbol of our love for each other, our marriage. At some point, it was a shield, a warning that its owner was inaccessible to others. I highly doubt that most people appreciate and recognize what this symbol means. I know that for me, this ring helped fend off other women. I hoped your ring would do the same for you. Since you changed your mind about living with me, I think I no longer need this symbol to protect me. It just reminds me of what once was." I looked her straight in the eye until she looked back at me. "When the time comes, you will decide what to do with this ring." I walked up to her and closed her fingers around the gold band. She watched me and took responsibility. "Frank?" I was just falling asleep when she called out to me. "Thank you for the evening. I enjoyed the concert and chatting with you. Contact me." I fell asleep again. In the morning, breakfast was waiting for me. Linda made bacon and eggs. She was a great cook, and I appreciated her efforts. I noticed that Linda had not taken off her wedding and engagement rings. I also saw that she kept fingering them while she ate with me. That morning, Carol called me at work. "Carol, I'm surprised I can hear you. What can I do for you?" "Lunch today, 12:30 at Bohemia." She switched off and I stared at the dead headset. I wasn't sure what to expect at lunch. I didn't know Carol very well. Linda became friends with her at work. She was pleasant to look at, but was never very friendly to me. She was one of Linda's friends with whom they often communicated. I walked into the bar I'd invited Jessica to that first night. She was already sitting at the table covered with a white linen tablecloth and waved her hand to me. Her face was tense and sharp. The conversation will probably not be pleasant. As soon as I sat down and my order was taken, Carol glared at me. "What the hell are you up to? Linda is in agony, and you pull this stupid trick, dating other women in front of her." I think I blushed for the first time. It was partly embarrassment, partly anger. I quickly closed my mouth before saying something I would regret later. I immediately realized that everything I said and did at lunch today would be immediately reported to Linda. She watched me as I regained control of my emotions. For a long time, I thought about how to answer. Finally, I spoke. "Carol, how much do you know about what's going on with Linda?" "I know her husband is acting like a complete idiot." She growled. The people around were looking in our direction. "Carol, stop talking nonsense. Answer my question honestly, and I will answer yours. I have nothing to hide, and you?" Carol swallowed and was glad that our waiter had chosen that moment to serve us our food. I sat and waited. "Linda is confused," Carol admitted. "So confused that she needs to date other men to sort out her thoughts?" Carol blushed and took a sip of water. "Linda had some weak moments, Frank." "I bet," I said sarcastically. "We tried to help her figure it out," Carol answered. "You see, my dear Carol, this is where I make an exception. Why are you and your friends responsible for helping her work things out between her and her husband?" Carol was silent. "Really, why do you care at all?" "Linda is my friend." "And what?" I said. "I should be her best friend, her partner, her life partner. Don't you think that if she had any problems, she should have talked to me first? Don't you think she should have come to me to sort things out?" Instead, she goes to her friends, who are apparently such good and responsible people that they take her to places where she can work out her feelings with other men. Men who don't seem to care that they're kissing another man's wife. Carol paled slightly. No, she turned very pale. She didn't seem to have much of an appetite right now. Somehow Carol opened the floodgates of rage in me. This was another stupid, just friend who decided to stick her nose into other people's affairs. Let me ask you something, Carol. Are you married? She shook her head. Have you ever been married? Another wiggle. Do you have a degree in counseling? No. So what gives you the right to give someone marriage advice? You've never been married, so how do you know what it is? What gives you the right to manipulate someone else's marriage? She gasped. But I'm her friend. Not from where I'm sitting. How many times have you talked to me? Once or twice, as far as I remember. I've been married to Linda for 15 years, but when have you ever taken the time in your life to meet, talk, and get to know your friend's man and partner? I've been in her life for 15 years, so I know her like no one else. You talk about advice. You talk about helping her through this. But what the hell do you know about me other than what Linda told you from her point of view? I felt like Carol was about to cry. I reached out to her as best I could, now to convey a message to her, and through her to Linda. Carol, Linda told me how she felt. She wanted a divorce, she told me, and I quote, I don't love you anymore. Well, Carol, tell me, how should I react to this? What possible argument can I give her to say that she is wrong? Well, she was the one who wanted a divorce. Why should I be miserable, hoping she'll change her mind? I finished my drink. My food was half eaten, but I was already finished. I stood up and took one last look at Carol. I discovered that other women see something in me. My wife doesn't see it anymore. She pushed me away. I didn't push her away. I'm not going to cancel my life because my partner is confused and doesn't want me anymore. I'm trying to move on. How she feels about it is her own business. I no longer try to convince her and tell her how she should feel. Now I can accept it. With that last statement, I walked away before Carol could say anything else. I knew that as soon as I left the restaurant, she would be on the phone with Linda. At that moment, I had a lot to think about. This evening, I was going to meet Janet. Everything went very well with Janet. Janet was different from the others. She was a black woman, younger than me, but very beautiful and very sexy. We were very polite and civil when she first joined our group, but there was a moment a few months later when I was telling a rather risque joke to some guys when Janet came into the room behind me to hear my rather flamboyant punchline. The men around me noticed her, and they all held their breath as I turned to see her shocked face. I smiled at her with a rather mischievous smile and said, "Admit it, this is both true and funny." She stood there for a moment with an "I can't believe that white boy just said that to me" expression, and then burst out laughing with me. From that point on, she became one of the guys. But by the end of my date with her, she was a real woman. Janet allowed me to go further than my other dates, and at the very last moment, I was the one who turned down her offer to stay the night. As much as I wanted it, there were problems with Linda that needed to be resolved before I could sleep with another woman. "Frank?" Linda asked when I got into bed. "Yes?" "Frank, I need you to take a shower." "For what?" It was dark. The lights were off, but Linda's voice was breaking. I heard her sobbing. "Please, Frank, if you don't take a shower, then I'll have to ask you to go to the guest room to sleep." I was confused. "What's happening?" I turned on the bedside lamp and saw my wife. Her face was red and her eyes were wet. She couldn't look me in the eye. "Please, Frank, you can come back to our bed, but I ask you to please take a shower." "What's wrong? I always shower in the morning, honey. You know that." She turned away from me. She turned her whole body away from me. "You smell like her." "About?" "I had Janet's scent on me. Yes. I got out of bed. I felt like crap. I looked at her. She was still turned away from me. "I'm sorry. I didn't understand." "Look, if you want me to go to the guest room, I can do it." "No," she sobbed. "I want you to come back to our bed. Frank, I can't stand the fact that you're wearing someone else's scent. I just cannot. I'm sorry. I want you in our bed. It's bad enough knowing you're seeing other people. I can pretend you're going out with guys. I can ignore my friends telling me who they saw you with. I might even meet them like that Heather girl and tell myself that you're just friends. But now I know. I can smell her. I can say, I want you to come back to our bed, but only after you take a shower. I can't stand the smell of her on you. I walked over to her side of the bed. I didn't linger. I leaned over and kissed her forehead. I'm sorry. I wasn't very attentive. Let me take a shower and I'll go back to our bed. The next morning was Saturday, and I overslept. It's been a long week for me. Going out every evening made me realize my age. I was hoping I wouldn't come down with a cold or something like that. Linda woke me up with breakfast. Then she asked me what my plans were. I don't have anything for the weekend, I told her. Frank! I was still sitting at the kitchen table. What? Frank! She put her hand in her pocket and pulled out something. She came up to me and knelt down in front of me. She opened her palm, and inside, I saw my wedding ring. She grabbed my hand and looked up at me. Frank, I want to work on our marriage. I think maybe I haven't thought this through. She carefully began to place the ring on my finger. I let her. I still love you. She was on her knees, waiting for me to say something. Finally, I spoke. Do you really feel this way? She nodded. No divorce? She nodded vigorously again. What about other men? There is no one but you. That's it for you. Now comes the most delicate part. You all will probably think I'm crazy for this, but I went ahead anyway. You have to understand that I will still date other women from time to time. Linda swallowed. We sat like that for a long time. Our gazes met each other. During this whole process, I learned something about my wife. I was confident of the outcome. Finally, she nodded. I guess I shouldn't be surprised, she said. I think I'm in love with you too, I told her. I grabbed her and kissed her. I kissed her deeply. She kissed me back. Linda, it turned out, had low self-esteem. I treated her well. Well, not exactly. Over the years, we have grown apart from each other. My biggest mistake was not acknowledging how she felt. Every time she told me how she felt, I contradicted her. Do you know how harmful this is? How arrogant of someone to tell another person that what they feel is not true. All this did was build up her resentment and hostility towards me. Over time, I got her to the point where she stopped appreciating what she had. Actually, maybe it's my fault, but over time we changed. Well, she changed, I never changed. So why would I want to go back to who I was before? I played a guess. She wanted me to come back, but we've both changed. She now knew that there were others behind the scenes ready to replace her if she decided to go her own way. Do you have to date others? She whined. I'm not going to date other men. I looked at her and smiled. Yes, I will do it from time to time. You may be my wife, but I am your husband. Don't forget about this, and I won't forget about you. She smiled. Yes, she smiled. Take me to bed and show me what I was missing. Show me what all these other girls got from you. Do you think you have what I need? I asked. I'll just show you my love and maybe make you so tired that you won't have any strength left for any other woman. I picked her up and carried her into the bedroom. I lowered her onto the bed and we both peeled off our clothes with a sense of urgency that almost panicked. Our lust and passion exploded as I took her. Then she took me. Then she took me again. Somewhere along the way, she realized from my stamina that I hadn't slept with any of the other women. After 15 years, my wife knows what I can do in bed. She wore a knowing smile for the rest of the day. I said nothing. What happened on my dates was a topic I didn't bring up. She didn't do that either. It was an episode in our lives that is best left in the past. For my part, I now did not ask her about the men with whom she kissed and talked. My wife now looks at me with a certain amount of awe and respect. I never would have believed that my plan would work. It wasn't a very good plan. At first, I was simply too stubborn to give her the satisfaction of seeing her destroy her husband with her hurtful words and request for a divorce. When I saw how she reacted and accepted that I was seeing other women, while she stayed at home waiting for me, I took my plan further. I won it back by moving away from her. What you don't have is what you want most. What you have is what you want least. These are the words I live by now. Having freed her and me, we are now more together than before. So am I dating others? I haven't had to do this yet. The first sign that Linda is returning to her old self will lead to my next date. I know it. She knows this, and together we work to not just listen to each other, but to hear